Hey you, it's Allison. I'm a death doula, grief educator and coach, as well as an end of life services planner. Let's talk today about why grief is so hard. Number one, grief. When we're in the midst of grief, we often experience lack of memory. This is both short-term and long-term memory loss that we experience. We may say things like, I can't remember things the way that I used to. I, if I didn't have my calendar in front of me, I wouldn't even know what day it is. I'll share this with you. One of the examples that I had in my memory loss, after, I guess within the last, within the 6 months that my dad passed, I had been working, at an assignment at a company. It was a client of mine, and I had gone there many times, had even worked for them in the past, and I had finished my project that was there on site, and I got in my car, turned on my car, knowing that I was going to go home, but I couldn't remember how to get there. Most of the time we drive from work to home on muscle memory. We don't usually have to do a GPS directions to get home. I could not remember how to get home. And yes, I had to utilize GPS to help me get there. Number two, when we are experiencing grief, we have sleep problems. Sometimes we sleep too much. Sometimes we don't sleep enough. I remember going to my counselor saying, I'm not sure what's wrong. I just don't even want to get out of bed. She said, that's actually really normal. It's part of the situational depression that we feel in grief is we lack the ability to sleep really well, or we sleep so much, or we just don't want to get out of bed. We also have a decrease in our tolerance for things. We may say things like, what I seem to have tolerated before this loss, I really struggle to do after the loss. Like my capacity has changed. I know I've talked about this in the past, but my ability to do multiple things basically kind of stopped at ground zero to one thing at a time. I could not do more than one thing at a time. I could only laser focus on the most important things. And if they weren't the most important, they just didn't get done. Uh, the next thing I want to share is that there's the stigma when it comes to our grieving process. Um, Here are some things that get said. I don't want to say why they died. It's really interesting that people will ask me, "How did your dad die?" Why does it matter? I wanted them to be loved for how they lived, instead of like being obsessed with how they died. Um, the other thing is like the stigma that grief defines who we are, and it redefines who we are. It doesn't necessarily become who we are, but it absolutely defines who we are. There's the Allison before the death and the Allison after the death. What also makes grief really hard is the loneliness that we experience. Often I tell people that once we enter grief, we've become a part of a club that we didn't ask for, and then we're also speaking a whole another language that people don't understand unless they've had a significant loss. Something that we might say sound like, even though I'm surrounded by people that I love, and even sometimes those that get it, I still feel kind of this pull towards emptiness. There's also something that doesn't get talked about, and this will kind of be the last thing that I talk about on what makes grief hard, is if we've had a tumultuous relationship with the person that passed, or it was an abuser, we still grieve them. That grief looks really different, and it is a grief that most people do not understand. Um, we can feel feelings of relief. So my dad and I had a really tumultuous relationship and was his caregiver for a long time. And I did feel a sense of relief after he passed. And I felt tremendous guilt, and quite honestly, still working through that. But did feel a tremendous sense of guilt because I actually felt relief. I also had feelings of sadness and feelings of anger. Sometimes I just didn't care. There was tons of apathy that I experienced. And often we feel like we shouldn't grieve someone that abused us. And we do. It is absolutely a human experience. when we're talking about grief and the hardships of grief. There's a whole nother list, and I'll do another part two on this. But I'm curious for you, when you hear me talk about the things that make grief hard, what resonates for you? What kind of experience are you having when you hear about this?